waiting. Waiting in a queue. Waiting for someone who's always late. Waiting for results. Waiting. It can be irritating and confusing and can even cause us to be a little scared at times. When I was in Sunday school, and I'm not going to tell you how many years ago because I'm one of the young ladies,
Come on, fix it.
we were given an illustration when we were being taught about prayer and how God prays. And I don't know if anyone can remember the traffic lights. Any of you ever? Yeah? Yeah, come on then, Lorraine. What's the traffic light illustration?
Well, green for go, red for wait, and, wait.
Right, okay. If you think of a set of traffic lights and you think about our prayers to God, sometimes they'll give you a green light and that's yes.
Yeah.
And sometimes they'll give you a red light and that's no. But sometimes they'll give you an amber light and that's wait. Now, even as a child, I didn't like amber very much. And if I'm honest, I don't like much either now. But we live in a very different society than the one that I grew up in as a child. People expect everything to be instant. And I have to confess, even I get frustrated when my computer takes more than 2 minutes to boot up. Even though when I think about it, I can remember when it took half an hour. You no longer need to save up to buy stuff. You're bombarded with adverts. Buy now, pay later. Actually, come to think of it, it's probably a sermon in that somewhere. Next day delivery is the norm. And if you live in London or the big cities, the same day drone delivery. And yet, I'm not quite sure how a 52-inch television would look after it had been delivered by a drone, but we expect it like that. And if we have to wait for something, quite often it seems inferior to us. If it was good, we could have it now. But, you see, God doesn't quite see things the way we see them. And Isaiah writes down something that God says to us. The Lord says, my thoughts are not like your thoughts, and your ways are not like my ways. Though I have to stress here that we serve a God that is more than capable of working in the instant. But he quite often likes to work in the wait. Well, thanks very much, Debbie. That's right encouraging to you all, isn't it? And if I was talking about you and me sorting things out, then yes, I could understand that, but I'm not talking about you and me sorting things out. See, as I just read, God doesn't think like we do. He has a different agenda than we do. And he sees things far deeper than we ever could. The Bible is a storehouse of information and reference material, and it covers all sorts of situations. In fact, every situation that you could find yourself in, basically, it's in there. Because it's full of people like us. They just lived a few years ago. And I'm going to pick two people out of that mass of information we've got who had to wait. And they're very different ways of reacting to that situation. Are you the sort of person that gets irritated by having to wait? Do you get frustrated and even angry at having to wait for things? Well, you're not the only one. Because tucked away in the Old Testament, there's a little book called Habakkuk. Now, Habakkuk is considered one of the minor prophets. But I don't know about you, but if I had things that I said and recorded put down in the greatest living book of all time, I wouldn't consider myself minor. But even so, he's stuck amongst all the little prophets. You've got your big Isaiah and Jeremiah and Job and Psalms, and then there's a whole section of little books. And Habakkuk isn't actually like a lot of the other prophets in the Old Testament, he wasn't going out and spouting to the people about their shortcomings. And he wasn't declaring something that was going to stand on the street, every street corner, and be read out. Like the tellers that used to go and give the news to everybody. Habakkuk is a transcript of a conversation that he had with God. Now, the children of Israel had once again turned their back on God and his ways. It wasn't unusual. The army of Babylon were amassing on the borders, waiting to invade. And Habakkuk got in a little bit frustrated by all this, because God didn't seem to be doing what he thought he should. And here is his opening gambit. How long, Lord, must I call for your help, but you don't listen? Or cry to you violence, but you don't save? Why do you make me look at injustice? Why do you tolerate wrongdoing? Destruction and violence are before me. There's strife and conflict abounds. Well, he won't pull in any punches, was he? Wouldn't it be good at times to see what's on God's mind? Wouldn't it be great to understand what it is he's planning? And that's the place Habakkuk was in. It's not fair! I'm following what I'm supposed to be doing, and they aren't listening. Why aren't you moving the way that you're supposed to move? I need this thing sorting, and I need it sorting now. Sound familiar to anybody? But then again, maybe you're not the kind of person that gets frustrated with waiting. Maybe you're the kind of person that struggles with inactivity. We automatically lean towards our familiar life. Old friends, old habits, old lifestyles, they don't seem to require any patience or staying power. It's a life of we try something, and if it doesn't seem to be going right, then we go on to the next thing, because that's easier to do than sticking with it. We live off the adrenaline of constant action. And guess what? Once again, there's somebody in the Bible that knows just what that feels like. Picture the scenario. Jesus has come back from the grave. He's appeared to his disciples. This was big news. Surely now was the time to get on the back of the momentum and get out there and take the world by storm. Now Jesus could really show the world what he was made of. And yet, there were no cheerleading processions through Jerusalem. There were no nationwide tours and no book deals. What a lost opportunity. It was like Jesus was just biding his time. Now Peter was an act first, think later kind of guy. Always in the thick of it. Total commitment, totally in there, all his energy. Let's show the world what they're missing. Yet Jesus seemed to be resting and waiting for something. And it's really hard for Peter, because he had to be doing something. And that's what he did. Afterwards, Jesus appeared again to his disciples by the Sea of Galilee. It happened this way. Simon Peter, Thomas, Nathanael, the sons of Zebedee, and 2 other disciples were gathered together. I'm going out to fish, Simon Peter told them. And they said, okay, we'll go with you. So they went out and got in the boat, but that night they caught nothing. These were experienced fishermen. There was no harm in going back to their old life, was there? Now, be assured, they weren't actually doing anything wrong. The thing was, they needed to do, and this doing didn't include Jesus. They'd reverted back to how things had been before they'd met Jesus. They'd gone back to the familiar, to the old ways. They'd done the one thing that they thought they could do, that they were good at. Now, I'm not pretending to know what was on Peter's mind that day, but I can relate to how I would react. And if God isn't moving fast enough or purposefully enough, we often like to revert back to ourselves and our own way of doing it. When we're waiting for God to change that person, fill that building, heal that situation, create that opportunity, if I could just do this, this and that, or if God did this, or said that to that person, or made that happen, it may be worth noting what comes at the end of verse 3. They caught nothing. The Bible tells us of loads of people who didn't see God move as quickly as they thought he should. You've got poor Joseph, who spent years in prison for something he hadn't done, waiting to see God's justice and to see his dreams fulfilled. You've got Elijah, who spent years running away from Jezebel, who wanted his head, until he got to the stage where he curled up on the floor and said, I just want to die. I have to tell you that in both of those situations, God came through in the end. What I'm trying to say with all that is waiting's hard. So, why does God make us do it? Is it to frustrate us? Is it to belittle us some way and keep us in our place? Is it to press our buttons to see what we're made of? Well, I'm sure you'll be very happy to know that the answer is no to all of that. Go back to what Isaiah said, the Lord's thoughts are not our thoughts. And he doesn't do things the way we would do them. You see, God doesn't look at waiting the way we do. To him, he doesn't see waiting as negative at all. Whether it's a new job, a new home, someone to love, filled seats in church, people that we know coming to know Jesus themselves, whatever it is, waiting time gives us a time to get praying, get preparing, and get perspective. Praying. You hear the word pray and prayer lots in the church. In fact, over my time as being a Christian, I've heard it hundreds of times. And you might be actually sitting there now saying, get praying, Debbie. What do you think I've been doing for the past X amount of years? I've prayed till I'm blue in the face and God still doesn't seem to be doing it. Well, maybe it comes down a little to the translation. You see, in English, the word pray means to ask, or beg, or plead. And I've done my fair share of doing that in time, I can tell you. However, the Bible, mainly written in Aramaic, and in Hebrew, the word for prayer is tefillah. This means to evaluate, to reflect on self. Prayer time is a time to examine yourself and your motivation. A time out, if you like. Our requests are part of that prayer, but it's not a desperate time wearing down our confidence and our hope, but a time of building up as we seek God and seek his face and seek what he wants to do. And that way our prayer requests fit into what his plan is. Now there's one thing I need to make clear at this point. So if you've fallen asleep, now's the time to wake up, alright? Because this is really important. And I mean really important. An apparently unanswered prayer is not a reflection on you and your faith. You get that? Yeah? If God doesn't seem to be answering your prayer, it's nothing to do with you and your faith. It's a waiting time. The kind of... Right. Sometimes it's very hard when you're in that waiting time. You do tend to think, well, have I not got enough faith? Am I not good enough? Am I not good enough Christian? Maybe if I was another Fred or another Enid, or another Glyn and Norma, maybe then God would answer my prayers. But that's not the way it works at all. Because God is there with you. Now, I want you to do something for me. You can guarantee if I'm preaching, I always ask you to do something weird, so I'll be on. Right. I want you to just concentrate for a minute and breathing in and out. Just concentrate on your breathing. Now I would like you to put your hand up in front of your face and carry on breathing. Take your hand down. Put it back up again. Take it down. When your hand was in front of your face, could you feel your breath? Yeah. Does that mean when you took your hand away, it wasn't there anymore? No. When you go outside and it's cold, and there's a great billow of smoke in front of you, and you can see your breath. But today, when it's nice and warm and we're in here, does it mean that you don't breathe anymore? No. Sometimes we see God move. Sometimes we feel God within us, but quite often we don't. He is just there as close to you as your breath that goes in and out of your lungs. The kind of self-examining prayer I've mentioned stops us focusing on what we think we want, what we think we need, and gets us prepared for what God's actually got planned. Now the disciples and families were gathered together after Jesus had gone back to heaven and he was away from him, and they'd been told to stay together and to wait. They didn't know what they were waiting for. They didn't know how long they were going to have to wait, but he told them to wait. So while they were there, all gathered together in this little room, worried that the authorities were going to arrest them and kill them, they started to plan. Now Judas had dropped away from the 12 and he was no longer part of them, and they somehow knew that they needed to be a band of 12, and so they started to prepare and they started to take votes and work out who was going to take Judas's place, because they knew once whatever God had got planned was happened, they needed to be able to just go. So they got themselves sorted in the meantime. If you want to know what happens next, then I suggest you read Acts chapter 2. And all I can say is Peter got his nationwide tour. Instead of getting frustrated, are we getting motivated? Instead of sinking in despair, are we using that time that we're waiting for a change of our attitude? To see what God's got in store? Seeing what is in our heart is what's in his heart. When it comes to preparing, we need faith. Now, faith's often looked at as a noun. Just a name that we give that bit of us that believes. That's our faith. But faith isn't just a noun. Faith is a verb. Faith is a doing word. We need to be exercising our faith. And the more we do, the stronger it will get. And the more we can do with it. Becoming familiar with our instruction manual, our Bible, sharing with each other, encouraging each other, getting spiritually fit, all takes place in the waiting time. So, if you can use the time to get praying and get prepared, then we'll get perspective. It's one of the plus sides of waiting. How many times would you have reacted differently if you'd had time to sit back and think about it? How many angry emails would never have been sent if somebody had had time to sit back and look a bit closer? How many hurts would never have happened if we hadn't just opened our mouth at that time? I'm sure you've heard people say, God sees the bigger picture. And that's not always easy to accept when you're in the middle of a situation. And I have to say, put my hand up here and say, there's times people have said it to me and I go, oh yeah, sure. Because it doesn't seem real when you're in the middle of it. But actually, that's what a waiting time's for. If as a parent, and she wasn't supposed to be sat in here today, so I'm not looking at her. But if as a parent I gave my child everything she wanted immediately, would it stop her from wanting more and bigger and better? No. Would she value what I'd given her so easily? No. Would she appreciate just the time and the effort it took to get those things for her? No. She would live in an instant world with instant rewards. But would that help her to become an understanding, patient, appreciative adult? No. So why should it be any different with God our Father and His children? Now, you'll be glad to know that the answer to your prayers isn't always going to be wait. There will be yes, and there will be no. Some doors will open, some doors will close. We heard last week, particularly, about lots of people who had answered prayers where God had moved instantaneously. And that's absolutely fantastic, and we need to share more about what God's doing for each of us. And sometimes, even no answers we can seem to take easier than the wait ones. I don't know why that is, but I made you stop and listen to a point I had earlier, and here's another one. A waiting season isn't a wasted season. Remember that. A waiting season is not a wasted season. Isaiah gives a wonderful picture of people that wait on God and His purpose and His timing, and he describes them as an eagle that soars up into the sky. And you just think about it, an eagle, it's one of the birds that flies the highest of any bird. And when they are up there, they see everything. That's what the waiting time is for, to give us those wings, to take us to that place where we can see things from a different perspective altogether. I'm a bit of a country fan, and I'm sorry you've heard me singing enough this morning already, but there's an old chorus, if you remember it, then you can please join in, based on that verse in Isaiah, and it says, "They that wait upon the Lord shall renew their strength. They shall mount up with wings as eagles. They shall run and not be weary. They shall walk and not faint. Teach me, Lord, to wait." Remember Habakkuk, right back at the very beginning? Well, I'm going to finish this off today with God's reply to that mini rant that he had. Because it says things in the way that I never could. And God said, "Watch and be utterly amazed, for I'm going to do something in your days that you would not believe, even if you were told."